Not what we expected from this game. Gonzaga goes down at Washington, and maybe we should have been more serious about the possibilities of an upset at home for the Huskies here. Strong finish in the final 10 minutes of this game for Washington. They go from down 6 points to ultimately winning the game by 5 points in the final 10 minutes of this game. Connor Hope, Heat Check CBB, and resident Gonzaga fan here on these recaps. How are you feeling? Not 24 hours after, but is this like an irate loss to you, or what are the thoughts?
Well, I think my dog just said it. It was frustrating. It was frustrating. You talk about, you can point to a lot of things when it comes to what the issues were in this game, right? You get 0 points from the floor, just 2 points at the free throw line from the freshman trio of Yo, Stromer, and Braden Huff. I think maybe 1 or 2 rebounds from that group, and then 3 turnovers, 9 fouls. That's what that. So from the outset, you're playing in that second half essentially 4-on-5 basketball because you're not getting anything. Defensively too, Yo missed some assignments. There was a baseline cut by Moses Wood where Yo kind of lost him off the ball, and Kepnong was able to just kind of throw him a bounce pass along the baseline. He had a reverse layup wide open, and they couldn't do anything about it. And that was, I believe, it either tied the game up or put Washington up by a score. And then Washington kind of just controlled the game from there. Ryan Nemhard, Anton Watson, Guillaume Ike all tried to do their own thing. And none of them are, take the ball and win games type of players. And you saw it too, where they were kind of almost forcing the ball to Ike at times, but like lazy passes forced to Ike, lazy finishes at the rim. There were 1 or 2 blocks by Kepnong, which, if Ike goes up stronger with it, if I think Ryan Nemhard had one, if he goes up stronger with it or gives it to a bigger guy to finish at the rim, maybe those shots don't get blocked. But I said last night, the inexperience on this roster, and not that the roster is necessarily inexperienced, but the inexperienced pieces on this roster gave you nothing. And when that happens, and now you have 5 players that are giving you something, and the only 2 positives really being Nolan Hickman and Ben Gregg in this game, in my opinion. And I'd say positives as like they weren't a net negative to the team down the stretch. You're going to lose that game. So this is a Gonzaga team that we knew coming in was a, top 15, top 20 team, not a top 5, top 10 team coming into the season. They're going to lose games in a road game against an upstart Washington team with a head coach who's coaching for his job is kind of one of those perfect situations to lose a game. And that's what you saw.
Yeah, I think looking back on it, I think it was easy to sort of just expect Gonzaga to roll here. Matchup wise, thought they would dominate the offensive rebounds, thought that would ultimately prove to be too much, quite frankly. Only 9 offensive rebounds in this game. I thought Washington did a pretty good job there. They actually out offensive rebounded them. They had 11 of their own. But I think looking back from my side of this, I think Gonzaga is fine. I'm not overly worried about the direction of this team. I think there are questions about what their ceiling is in the NCAA tournament, just given the depth concerns here. But to me, this game honestly was more of a, maybe we should take Washington a little more seriously here. We talked about in the preview, but they have 3 losses on the year, all to pretty good teams. They certainly would have liked to win at least one of those, if not more. But San Diego State came down to the buzzer in overtime. Colorado State, 5-point loss on a neutral. Like, Colorado State looks like a really good team right now. We're going to recap their game next. But to me, it's just, it's a team I wrote off because it's a Mike Hopkins team, and the collection of guys is gross on paper. No offense, but like Paul Mulcahy and Severe Wheeler don't get me excited. they got some dudes, and I think they play as a pretty cohesive unit. And to sort of overcome a game where it felt like they trailed at arm's length the entire game, but ultimately make the run late was impressive more than anything to me. I want to ask you just minutes wise, Braden Huff. 3 fouls in 5 minutes. That's essentially all he did in this game. He had 1 turnover. That's the only stat he recorded. Why was this an unplayable Braden Huff game?
So I'm of the opinion that Mark Few sometimes has a quick trigger on fouling out his own guys. First half, Braden Huff gets 2 quick fouls. He's out for the rest of the first half because that's just what Mark Few does. Second half, he gets a quick foul. And Ben Gregg was playing well. So if you're going from a freshman big who has, can't seem to get to stay out of foul trouble in this game with the way that Ketnong and Moses Wood and Keon Brooks were playing, you'd rather go with the more experienced player, the player that's hitting shots, defending without fouling, rebounding the ball. I actually thought Ben Gregg only playing 15 minutes was a little bit odd considering the foul trouble that Ike was getting himself into. And the need to hit shots. I mean, 3-point shots in that second half. Gonzaga didn't hit any. And so that kind of puzzled me. But Mark Few is, especially with freshman bigs, kind of quick to pull the trigger on, I'm going to foul you out. And then once you started seeing Ben Gregg was playing well, Yo got more minutes in that second half because he actually played pretty decent in the first half in the minutes that he was forced to play. Obviously didn't score a bucket from the floor, but he got fouled on a 3-point shot, made 2 of 3. He missed a couple of assignments missed a couple of guys on defense that he was defending. But that's, again, freshman mistakes. Dusty Stromer wasn't giving you anything either. So the 9 minutes for Huff doesn't necessarily concern me, because if you look at the rest of the games that they've played against top competition, like, he's been getting consistent 15 to 20 minutes a game.
Yeah.
And so I think this was just a matter of Washington was the more experienced team. Huff was fouling and couldn't defend the athletes in that front. I mean, not that Moses Wood is a huge athlete, but the other two, Kepnong and Brooks, certainly are. And so you go with the experience. Obviously, they don't have an experienced 3-man. So Dusty Stromer was forced into minutes that, probably would have gone to Steel Venters if he was healthy. Gonzaga doesn't have experience at the 3. And when you look at the way they play their 3 big lineups, that offense looks clunky. And when your offense is already looking out of sorts, you don't want to go with an inferior offense. So I'm not too concerned about the 10 minutes or 9 minutes that Huff got.
Yeah. Just for clarity purposes, it was 5 total minutes, but not that that's a difference from 9. And I think foul trouble, 3 fouls in 5 minutes is a lot, right? So
Yeah.
with that added,
Yo got 9, right?
Yeah, he had 10.
Yeah.
And then so from my side, I think the other Gonzaga bigs were also like playing pretty well. Like Ike was also in foul trouble. He had 4 fouls, but he had 18 points in 24 minutes. Ben Gregg, I thought, gave you good minutes in only 15 minutes off the bench. Watson was productive. He was rebounding his ass off. So to me, like, it's one of those games you look at the box score at the end and you're like, damn, you got nothing from Braden Huff. But in reality, in the moment, you didn't necessarily need it. It just stood out compared to the other games Gonzaga's played. The other thing that stood out to me, so I added this up. I think that Gonzaga is a very good shooting basketball team. That's my read on this. You can tell me if you disagree. You watch this team more than anybody, but right now they're shooting 35% on the season. That's 102nd in the country. In wins this season, they're shooting 39%, 54 for 137. That would rank near the top in the country in their 7 wins. In their 2 losses, it just hasn't been any middle ground. It's been disastrous. It was 11 for 50 combined in the 2 losses. That's 22%. Purdue was significantly worse than this game was, but this was still pretty bad. 5 for 18 from 3 in this one. Was this just missing shots, or did Washington do something to get to the Gonzaga shooters?
I think it was just missing shots at first. You look at the closing 10 minutes, there were, I don't even want to call them dumb shots. They were just really bad contested deep shots that Gonzaga generally doesn't take. You saw one from Nemhard that was almost at the logo with the guy like right in his face. And I do think Gonzaga is a good shooting team. I tweeted this stat the other day. They're shooting the shooting overall for all, I guess, 9 teams that played on those Maui Invitational rims on Oahu, if you include Hawaii. And I didn't look at their opponent that game in their shooting stats, but you look at Hawaii too in that late game on that second day of the Maui Invitational. But Gonzaga's shooting in the Maui Invitational was like 20 some odd percent. They were shooting coming into this game over 40% if you take out the Maui Invitational. But I just think, Gonzaga's been this way where teams make threes against them, or teams where they're making a lot of threes, they win. And if they don't, they lose. And it's more of like a correlation thing, right? It's like in football when you see a team that wins and they have a lot of rushing yards or rushing attempts versus when they lose, and it's because of game script. Like Gonzaga was just trying to generate some sort of offense in this game. Same with the end of that game against Purdue, and just taking bad threes and missing them, and taking a lot of them because, in both those games, they need some way of generating offense, and it wasn't happening on the interior. You saw them start to rely a lot on the three after Kettenong had like 2 or 3 blocks in a 4-minute span. So I'm not too concerned. I think they're going to be inconsistent shooting all year because they don't have that reliable 3-point shooter. But again, it's a bad game. Everyone has them. I think Washington is looking like a top 3 or 4 team in the Pac-12 right now, considering the other losses that the Pac-12 has taken. So big rivalry game on the road. You don't like to see the collapse, especially when they were up by 11, but it is what it is.
Yeah, just one you kind of shrug off and hope you regroup. So last quick hitter on Washington, and then I have one question to leave you with from a Gonzaga perspective. Does Washington make the tournament? You just said top 3, 4 in the Pac-12. That would imply they do. You feel good about that?
Yeah, I think so. I think right now, I think the Pac-12 gets 4 teams in. I think USC and Arizona are pretty safe. And then you've got a group of Washington, Colorado, Oregon, UCLA, Utah that are all right in there. And none of them have looked fantastic. Oregon's probably the best of that group when they're fully healthy. But between that, like Washington, depending on how you view BYU versus Gonzaga, Washington probably has the best win of that group of teams. So right now, I would probably have them ahead of Utah. But we've seen, this Pac-12, they beat up on each other, but there's going to be a lot of quadrant 2 opportunities in Pac-12 play for Washington, and the ability to get this, what is probably it's a quad 2 right now. It's probably a quad 2 at the end of the season, because I don't think Gonzaga finds its way into what is it, the top 15 in the net or whatever it is for a quadrant 1 home win. But it's still a really good quadrant 2 win for Washington.
Yeah, I like this Washington team. I also like this Pac-12. Like I think the barometer you said of 4-ish teams is probably accurate, but it's not that crazy to say I could see like 7 of these teams in the tournament. They all won't get there concurrently by the end of the season, but I think a lot of these teams are better than expected, with the caveat maybe being Colorado isn't as good as we had hoped they would be preseason. To me, look, USC's getting Bronny back. We don't know what they're going to look like with him yet. Utah looks very good to me right now. Oregon's got to get healthy, but if they do, I like what I've seen from them. UCLA is not close to what they could be right now, but we've seen them play really good teams down to the wire. And of the group, I think Washington has an argument that they're playing the best of the non-Arizona teams in the Pac-12 right now. So I like that call. I also think they get to the tournament. And my final question from a Gonzaga perspective, we're almost done with non-conference play. Big one coming up against UConn on Friday of this upcoming week. We'll have a preview on the channel as well, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But, looking at who Gonzaga's beaten so far, the Maui trip resulted in wins against Syracuse and UCLA. both of whom are not playing great basketball through this point in the season. USC, again, we just talked about them. We like their potential, but they've lost pretty much every big time opponent they've played. And then you've lost competitive games to Purdue, and a Washington game you led most of the game. At what point do you start to get concerned that Gonzaga just hasn't beaten anybody?
After the San Diego State game, because I think they lose to UConn.
Yeah.
San Diego State is really, because they play Kentucky in conference play. I fully expect Kentucky to be a national championship contender looking team consistently by that point. And I don't think Gonzaga is a national championship contender. And this is on the road in Rupp. So if Gonzaga can look good and beat San Diego State in that game, that, you know, they're probably going to be a 5-point, 4 or 5 point favorite in that game. If they can beat San Diego State by multiple scores, even though they wouldn't necessarily have beaten anybody, because I also think San Diego State is in pretty rough shape, considering they escaped with wins against UC San Diego and UC Irvine. And they're in all their games really against the Big West, they've looked rough. But I think then you have a Gonzaga team that's really escaped any bad losses. And when their expectations coming into the season were, you know, Sweet 16 would be a success this year for Gonzaga. And I still think they're a team that could, given the right matchups, win 2 games in March. You know, this is not a national championship team. And I think people who have that in their heads that it could be are wrong. Like I know I said last time, you know, given the right matchups, they could make a run. The likelihood that they don't encounter anyone, because even, you know, I thought Kepnang was going to be, you know, just another big, and he looked like the most dominant player on the court in that game, from a big man perspective. And so, you know, if they lose to San Diego State, I worry about them not reaching their ceiling. But I think realistically, what is their ceiling? Probably Sweet 16. Yeah. And so given that, like, you lose to Kentucky and UConn and Purdue, and then like Washington on the road is Washington on the road, but that's a in-state rivalry game. Washington had it 1-7, 7 goes at Gonzaga. But I'm not sweating losses to Purdue, UConn, and Kentucky if my expectations are we might, you know, Gonzaga might sneak into the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's the fair outlook. And I also think Gonzaga wins one of those 2 big games. I would lean UConn as definitely the better team right now, but wouldn't be shocked if Gonzaga pulled the upset. San Diego State at home, I definitely think Gonzaga should win. But I do just think we're kind of like, you know, it's resume picking. But I think coming into this Washington game, I was like, oh, Gonzaga's got a bunch of great wins. Like, they blew out Syracuse, who looks all right. And, you know, UCLA is a good team. That was a good win. In reality, the more I'm watching these other teams, I'm kind of like, yeah, I don't know. Like, maybe Gonzaga actually hasn't beaten anybody, and maybe I had an altered perception of where this team is at right now. They still have a long way to go. They're going to win a bunch of conference games. We know that. But a good performance against UConn would go a really long way in solidifying my belief on how good this Gonzaga team is. So, all right, that's Counter Hope, Heat Check CBB. I'm GregWaddell, Sleepers Media. Like we said, we will have a preview for Gonzaga UConn up later this week on the Sleepers Media YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it.